Blitz show. My name is Bruce Badgley, and as always, there he is, Mr. WPIAL, Mr. Statistic, Mr. Graphics, Ian McMeans. Ian, how you doing tonight, my friend?
I am great. We are here fully into the WPIAL playoffs now. This was kind of the big week where last week when we were talking, a number of the top teams had gotten buys, so they didn't play. But this was the week where all the top teams were in action. We had some great games around the WPIAL and statewide, but really around the WPIAL. There were a lot of great games. Few surprising results, which we'll talk about in a bit, but now we're kind of getting into the thick of things. We've got championship games happening this weekend in 5A and 6A, and then semifinal matchups in 1A through 4A. So we're getting down to it, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, it is too. I mean, I just finished. We actually did our Fresh Set of Downs podcast a little bit earlier than this tonight, and I tell you what, boy, it is just the best time of year. In one way, obviously, it's great to see the teams with all the fantastic stories. But then, obviously, on the flip side, there are some teams that just have some unfulfilled expectations and just downright heartbreak. And that's the tough part because both you and I, over the last few years, we've gotten to know teams and players and coaches and communities, and it's hard not to have some emotion for some of these teams that we know have worked so hard and then just fall short of that brass ring, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a journey for a lot of teams, but as we've kind of talked about all year, different teams have different definitions of success. And for a team like Deer Lakes, whose head coach we interviewed last week, Tim Burke, they went out and got beat pretty handily by Bell Vernon. But that loss will sting for a few weeks, but eventually they'll look back on this season as we won our first playoff game in school history. This was a tremendous success. So, we've seen teams, East Allegheny, who won that conference that Deer Lakes was in, the Allegheny 6 conference in 3A. They're playing in the semifinals for the first time since 1992. So they're playing Bell Vernon next. So, kind of whatever happens this season, they did something they hadn't done in almost 30 years. So yeah, 30 plus years. Wow. But nevertheless, other teams have, like we said, different definitions. For North Allegheny and Central Catholic, who will play for the WPIAL Championship in 6A this week, they are both have had their eyes set not only on a WPIAL title, but potentially making a deep run in the state playoffs. One of those stories is going to come to an end on Saturday night this week, but they've both put themselves in position to complete those stories. A team like Thomas Jefferson, which at the beginning of the year I thought was a top contender to challenge Aliquippa for the WPIAL title, lost in the quarterfinals, which was the first time since
That's
2011 they didn't make the semifinals. So
yeah.
it was, a somewhat historic result on the wrong end for TJ, whereas we've got some other schools with historic results on the good end. So, like we
Let's
said,
take a look.
yeah, let's talk about it. And I've already teased a lot of the big results, but people tuning into the show probably already knew what
That's all
happened.
right.
So
That's okay.
it's it's not too much of a surprise. All right. So if you're joining us, you obviously know where to find us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and our rarely used Instagram account. You can
I'm going to
also,
have to start using that Instagram account. I don't think that we're at the Sports Solutions Marketing Instagram page. If I've got to find it's under WPIAL Blitz, so I got to make sure that I get some more followers for you, and vice versa.
yeah, I should probably post on it more than like once a year too. That would probably help. But nevertheless, steelcityblitz.com is where all of my articles post. As far as my WPIAL games of the week posts, I have my WPIAL standings pages there, all that. So definitely check out the website. Also, if you're interested in Steelers coverage, because we mostly do that, the guys there are just kind enough to let me also post my WPIAL stuff there.
Sure, sure, and that's the same thing about Fresh Set of Downs. Eastern PA football. I'm covering, Penn State as well. So we both have our, our high school focus, but then obviously we have our other teams we like to do cover as well.
Yes. All right. So we're starting off with the streak watch. I already teased this a little bit. For the first time in 12 seasons, Thomas Jefferson did not make the semifinals. And what's incredible about that, too, is coming into this matchup with Montour, they had made the semifinals in 24 out of the last 25 years.
That's
That
incredible.
2011 year was their only miss. They lost to Knock in the quarterfinals that year. And this year they lost to Montour in the quarterfinals. So still a pretty incredible run overall for Thomas Jefferson, but their run of consecutive semifinals has come to an end. On the flip side, consecutive championship game appearances. Central Catholic is in the 6A championship game. Central Valley lost to Mars in the 4A quarterfinals, so their run of 4 straight title game appearances will come to an end. Aliquippa's run of 15 consecutive championship games is incredible and crazy. And they're playing Mars in the WPIAL semis this week. Beaver Falls, they've made the WPIAL championship game every season since moving down to 2A. They're playing Washington in the 2A semifinals this week. So they've still got a chance to continue those streaks as well.
Yeah, that Aliquippa streak, it's across multiple classifications too. I mean, that's even more incredible.
Yeah, it dates back to 2008 when they were a double A school under the 4 classification era. And then in 2016, they were playing in 3A, made consecutive championship games for 4 years in a row in 3A, and then got forced up to 4A by the state's, success formula, and now have made 3 straight 4A championship games. And if they beat Mars this week, could make a fourth. And the other thing I think that's potentially on the table here for Aliquippa is if they beat Mars and make this championship game, I think that'll be 6 of those success points for them that the state, determines if you move up in classification, which would
Yeah.
give them enough to potentially move up to 5A, which I'm sure would cause,
Oh,
quite the firestorm to happen once again. I know Aliquippa had to appeal to the state last time in order to stay in 4A and not get forced up into 5A. I mean, they're a 1A size school that's being forced to play in 4A. So we'll see how it all plays out. But that's a subplot to the semifinal game against Mars.
yeah, and that's a good point because remember too, I mean, obviously that success formula comes from postseason and that, but so much of it is reliant on, even regular season games too, in getting to that particular point of higher seeds and winning championships and that is such a wear and tear on physicality of a school that size to try and play 5A opponents all year long. That would be tough.
Yeah, that would be, and it wouldn't be fair to the kids, really. Is, at the end of the day, let's not forget, like, these are high school kids, right? And Aliquippa doesn't have that many kids on the roster. I mean, you were there the last couple years when they played Bishop McDevitt in the state championship games, and you saw the size difference of their rosters. That McDevitt had a ton of kids, and Aliquippa's roster was maybe half their size. So it does take a big toll on the kids. But Aliquippa is never going to back down from anyone. They're going to go out and play whoever's on the schedule, and they're going to give it their best shot. Absolutely. And I would give them a puncher's chance against a lot of 5A teams, but I think you're right. It's just the overall wear and tear of the
Of
schedule
the season
of
on
the
the team.
season. Yeah.
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 Yeah, thanks. Shout out to Don Walker, who's loving the Quips talk. So,
Hi, Don. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
yeah, we appreciate all the comments by our fans. That's for sure.
Yes, yes, and that was something that Mayor Walker from Aliquippa talked about when we had him earlier on the show earlier this year. That for their size school, their size community, the resources that they have available pale in comparison to the resources that a lot of 5A schools have, just as far as facilities and training and the athletic care and trainers that they're able to get for the kids. And that's, it's not just playing the games, it's all that other stuff that goes into it too. So it's
I
going to
think
be
that was Mayor Walker, by the way. That one chiming in, but anyway, maybe not. I don't know.
yeah. I think he has a brother named Don Walker, and he's
Okay.
Dwan. But
Oh, okay.
nevertheless,
That right.
yes,
He did say it was his brother.
yeah,
So,
there we go. We love
That's
all
all
of our
right.
Aliquippa fans. We
Yeah,
appreciate you
we
all
do.
tuning
We
in.
love all of our
We
fans,
do.
but
We do. That is true.
the Clips fans really have their presence felt.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So I teased this a little bit, but our Go MVP player of the week this week, I think this is the first time a wide receiver has won it this year.
Yeah.
AJ Alston from Montour had 5 receiving touchdowns in Montour's victory over Thomas Jefferson, which was the first time Montour ever beat TJ in the playoffs. So it's just an incredible performance. 5 receiving touchdowns is just nuts, especially in a playoff game against an opponent the caliber of TJ. And we got a couple clips here. We'll see if they're able to play. But he's
Yeah. Oh, look at that. Great throw under pressure,
yep.
too. Jeez.
And Jake Wolf, Montour's quarterback. Um, Interestingly enough, so Jake Wolf
Oh, look at
had
that.
5 touchdown passes, and AJ Alston caught 5 touchdown passes, but they were not all the same. Jake Wolf threw 5, but not all of them were to AJ. He actually left the game early because they were up by so much, and then AJ caught another one from a backup quarterback. But
See, and for me, and look, I'm not a talent evaluator, but that's all just mano a mano beating his man and great throws there, too. I mean, he was open, but he wasn't that open. So just a great throw and great separation there.
yep. Yeah, absolutely. So heck of a game from AJ Alston to put up 5 touchdowns against a Thomas Jefferson defense that was really good. I mean, even the games TJ lost, McKeesport beat him 28-7, and Trinity beat them, was it 23-7 or 23-6, I think. So like they weren't getting blown out in those games, the two that they lost, but Montour really took it to them. So impressive performance from the Montour Spartans. As I mentioned, AJ Alston had the 5 receiving touchdowns. Jake Wolf, Montour's quarterback, threw 5 and ran for another, and then had a nice little warm seat on the bench for the rest of the night. And the backup came in and threw a couple more
Crazy.
touchdowns in the route. Um, so just all around incredible performance from Montour. Elijah Faulkner from Central Catholic ran for 5 touchdowns in their semifinal win over Mount Lebanon. Quentin Martin had over 200 yards of total offense and 3 total touchdowns as Bell Vernon just ran past Deer Lakes. Tyke Hayes from Aliquippa, 256 yards and 2 touchdowns. And it wasn't just the 2 touchdowns, it was when they came that Latrobe gave Aliquippa everything they could handle. And Latrobe just battled their hearts out in this game. And Tyke put the game on ice in the 4th quarter that Latrobe had cut the lead to 2. And then he scored a touchdown to stretch the lead back out and pretty much put it away for Aliquippa. So, scoring touchdowns, it's not just about how many you score, it's about when you score them as well. And scoring those clutch
And
touchdowns
and in the
plus
case of
256
Elizabeth,
yards.
in the case of Elizabeth Forward, it's how you score them.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. 5 total turnovers for their defense and 3 of them returned for touchdowns. So just wow. I mean, that's all you can say about that. And I don't want to take anything away from Elizabeth Forward, but the story's out there, so I have to mention it. There was this weird news story floating around
Oh
that
boy.
one of West Mifflin's school board members was being investigated for giving their game plan to Elizabeth Forward's team before the game, which why a school board member from West Mifflin would give the game plan to the opponent makes no sense. But there was multiple news reports out there, so I have to mention it. Full disclosure. So that is a thing that is
Let's
happening.
just
Sort of,
say it made the news for some reason.
it made the news. The report is out there. So um, I can't say whether or not that contributed to Elizabeth Forward getting 5 turnovers on defense. I mean, obviously, you have to go out there and perform and play, and returning 3 of them for touchdowns is an incredible performance all around. So not trying to take anything away from Elizabeth Forward, but just trying to be upfront and open, full disclosure of
Mm-hmm.
the other stories that are floating around out there.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about some of these results that happened. In 6A and 5A, we had the semifinals these past week. All of these games were rematches of games that had happened earlier this year. Obviously, in 6A, with only five teams in 6A, every game that they played head to head was a conference game, so they were all going to see each other again in the playoffs. In 5A, the two games were both conference rematches. So let's talk about the results. In 6A, it wasn't very close. Central Catholic just ran past Mount Lebanon. Elijah Faulkner had the 5 touchdown runs. North Allegheny similarly ran past Cannon McMillan. Their dual threat quarterback, Logan Kushner, had over 200 yards of total offense, 3 total touchdowns, and Daniel Sellers had both a rush and a receiving touchdown. But that sets up a rematch now between Central Catholic and North Allegheny for the WPIAL championship. This is kind of where things have been headed all year. And they obviously played each other once earlier this year with Central Catholic winning pretty handily. This is a rematch of last year's championship game. These have been the two premier and preeminent teams in 6A in the WPIAL. So they are facing off for the championship for the second straight year. This is actually Central Catholic's 5th consecutive championship game appearance, their 10th in the last 11 years, but they haven't won one since 2020. So it's been a few years since they actually claimed the title, and North Allegheny is the defending champions. So I don't know how much that plays in. You know, Central Catholic obviously won big early in the year during the regular season, but this is the postseason now, so it's a rematch. And I think we've talked on the show about how since North Allegheny lost that game, their sole focus has pretty much been on preparing for their second matchup with Central Catholic and what they were going to do differently. North Allegheny's got a great coach in Art Walker, who has won multiple WPIAL titles during his tenure there. And Central Catholic has a first-year head coach in Ryan Leemeyer, who's trying to win his first WPIAL championship. Granted, he has open things up for Central Catholic's offense, that they're scoring all over the place. And actually, Central was the highest scoring team in 6A until this past week when they put up 42 and North Allegheny put up 49. So that fractionally put North Allegheny ahead on the points per game this season. But these are the top offenses and defenses in 6A. Both these teams are just stacked with talent. North Allegheny has most of their team back from the team that won the title last year, with Logan Kushner at quarterback, Tyree Alualu at running back and linebacker, Kieran Boyd, who I think was our 6A player of the year last year, at wide
Yeah, he
receiver,
was.
kick returner, defensive back. He kind of does it all for them. But Central's loaded. I mean, Peyton Wayner at quarterback, Elijah Faulkner at running back, the Penn State commit Peter Gonzalez at wide receiver, which his dad went to Pitt and was a quarterback there. So changing allegiances a little bit in the Gonzalez household, but a bunch of other talented receivers for Central Catholic. And then they also have probably the most talented group of linebackers in the WPIAL, with a Penn State commit in Anthony Specca and a Michigan commit in Cole Sullivan. So Central is incredibly talented. North Allegheny is obviously the defending champs. I think this is going to be a tight game. I don't think it's going to be a runaway one way or the other.
And that's why I think special teams is, could be the deciding factor here. Um, Whether it's kick return touchdown, punt return touchdown, missed extra point. So many missed extra points here in the postseason have cost teams. Okay. And for nothing more than even mentally. When a team misses an extra point, it just really deflates that team, and also opens things up for the opponent, knowing full well that, say, they can take the lead with 2 scores or even 3 scores. So it keeps your opponent in there. So watch special teams in this game, especially obviously with so much on the line. This is a really going to be a difficult one to pick, but obviously two teams that know one another very well. Hey, I think in instances like that, you got to go to the bottom of the playbook. You got to pull out some of them, Nittany specials, where the quarterback hands it off and goes out for a pass or some type of double reverse. I think that's what's going to be required for one of these teams to really separate from the other, Ian, because they are so close.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely there's definitely ways both of these teams can be, I'll say, exploited a little bit. Central looked like this dominant juggernaut until they went and lost to Pine Richland. And that was the game Pine Richland switched to that Wildcat offense and put Ethan Pillory, ran the ball 56 times. But that blueprint's out there. And North Allegheny has a dual threat quarterback in Logan Kushner, who, if they decide, hey, we're going to just run the ball with our quarterback, I mean, he ran for 2 touchdowns and over 100 yards last week against Cannon Mac. So that's out there now. But also, since Central saw that they were vulnerable that way against Pine Richland, they've probably been doing some work on defense for how can we combat this if somebody comes at us with this. So, it is that 3D chess match of, okay, what do we try? How much do we try it? Do we put the ball in the air against Central secondary? Do we try and run it against their linebackers? And for Central, it's keeping that balance on offense, I think, is key for them. That they have a talented running back in Elijah Faulkner, but they've also got a really good passing game. And if you keep North Allegheny off balance, they won't be able to stack the box against the run, but they also won't be able to back the safeties up against the pass. So being, running play action passes, being multiple, doing different things than what your trends might say you do is probably going to be the key for Central for winning this game.
I totally agree with you. I think breaking of tendencies is you have to somehow, do some self scouting here, break your tendencies, maybe do the same play, but do it from 3 new formations. I mean, that's the play that works. Just do it a little bit differently. And yeah,
That's
look,
how
I think that's what a veteran coach might do more so than a head coach that is, only in his first year, but we'll wait and see.
that's how the Steelers run their offense. They only have about 3 plays and they just run them from
They
different
just run it for
formations.
different
But
different formations,
I
sure.
digress that Matt Canada is running a high school offense. That's
That's
another.
okay.
If you
That's
want to
another
hear me
show.
complain about Matt Canada, tune into the Steel City Blitz podcast on Thursday night.
Sure, right, exactly.
The one other thing I'll mention, just because you mentioned special teams, is that a couple years ago, I think it was, I don't remember if it was 2020 or if it was the one before that Central won. They played Pine Richland. I think it was the 2020 championship that they beat Pine Richland. And it was a low scoring game. And the MVP of that game was Central's punter, just because Central had such a good defense that year. I think it was like a 10-7 game or something, but Central's punter just continually pinned Pine Richland back inside their own 10-yard line, and Pine Richland just couldn't get moving on offense the whole game. And, one turnover, I think, led to Central's touchdown. And that was pretty much the difference in the game. But really, the punter was the MVP because he just kept them pinned back the whole time. So in a low scoring game, you've got the potential for that kind of stuff to happen too. But you're right. Special teams and turnovers is really where these games potentially get won and lost.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gonna be a good one.
Yep. All right, so let's talk about the statewide bracket. The WPIAL champion will enter the statewide bracket in the quarterfinals next week. So the WPIAL is right here in the statewide bracket, if you can see where my mouse is. So they'll play either the winner of State College and Erie McDowell. So this week, because we have the round of 16, I figured it would be good to show where
Yeah.
everyone statewide kind of sat in my power rankings. So all the top 10 teams are still alive, and actually 14 of the 16 top 16 teams are still in it. Just 2 teams outside the top 16 that are still in based on my statistical rankings.
My broadcast game for Penn Live this week is Manheim Township and Cumberland Valley. So I'll get, a couple of good 6A teams in there. Really anxious to see both of them strap it up there. But yeah, look, the rubber hits the road now. Obviously, rankings are fun, but head-to-head matchups are what we live for. And boy, is this really gonna accelerate into some great games? I'll tell you what, it's gonna be crazy.
Yeah, it is. And that Manheim Township game, District 3 is on the same half of the bracket as the WPIAL. So
Yeah.
the WPIAL is on the top half of the left-hand side, and District 3 is the bottom half of the left-hand side. So, potentially if the WPIAL champion gets past whoever wins between State College and Erie McDowell, they would play the District 3 champion in the state semifinals. So for the WPIAL crowd, that's definitely one to keep an eye on, since Manheim Township is the number one seed in District 3 and my number one ranked team based on how the numbers played out.
Yeah, and the other semifinal in 6A in District 3 is Harrisburg hosting Central York. Those Central York's the undefeated team there, and with Harrisburg's only loss to Manheim Township. So, the two games from a 6A level that people in the WPIAL need to start. I understand that you're very parochial, but you need to start paying attention to some of these matchups across the state here, and who these teams are and what they're like. I think it's that time of year.
Also, I noticed this when I was looking through the brackets, and just because I thought this was fun, in District 1, we have Central Bucks West taking on Central Bucks South, and then Downingtown East taking on Downingtown West. So
Yeah,
that just from a naming convention standpoint, I was like, this is so much fun.
yeah, we've got directional semifinals.
Pretty
But
much.
that East and West is going to be a really good game. We just dissected that on Fresh Set of Downs. I'm telling you, gang. You can watch us on demand there, but that West and East, that's really going to be a fantastic matchup. Both of those teams run the ball very effectively. It's going to be a fast game.
That's yeah, and then in the top quadrant, I mean, St. Joe's Prep is playing Abraham Lincoln, who is the champs of the Philadelphia Public League, so they'll probably get smoked.
Yeah.
And then Parkland and Nazareth for the District 11 championship is the
Yeah,
other one.
Parkland's a little dinged up. Their starting quarterback hurt, not sure that they're gonna play. And correct, that's who would St. Joe Prep's gonna play the winner out of District 11 there. And yeah, it's a shame. Parkland really a top flight team there. But so yeah, I mean those are all the heavyweight 6As out on the eastern side.
All right. So moving on to 5A, Peters Township was all over Moon and gets back to the WPIAL championship game for just the third time in their school history. Did it both by air and by ground, with Nolan DeLucia throwing for 3 touchdowns, 2 of them going to Thomas Aspinall, and then Vinny Sarcone running for 2 touchdowns. So Peters Township, the only unbeaten team in 5A, back in the championship game for the third time since 2019, when they made the title game for the first time in school history. So that's kind of cool. Also back in the championship game is Pine Richland. This was a crazy ending to this game. I don't know if you saw how it ended on Twitter, but
I
yeah.
did not.
Oh, okay. So Penn Hills was up 9-3. Actually, they're up 9-0, and Pine Richland, their kicker, made a 42-yard field goal to cut it to 9-3. And then Pine Richland got the ball back with a little under 2 minutes to play, drove down, or maybe it was about a minute to play, whatever, drove down the length of the field. Freshman quarterback Aaron Strader went in the game. He had kind of been like a dual threat, mostly run the ball guy earlier this year, and then they went to that Wildcat, and he wasn't playing as much, but he got plugged in and threw the ball down the field. Pine Richland marched it down, and then Aaron ran in a touchdown over the left side with 2 seconds left to tie the game at 9. And then Grant Aguirre made the extra point to put Pine Richland up 10-9. And then on the kickoff, Penn Hills is trying to lateral it all around, and they fumble, and Pine Richland runs it back for a touchdown to make the final score 16-9, which is not as close as the game actually was, because Pine Richland really scored the go-ahead points with 2 seconds left in the game.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah, yeah. And for a freshman quarterback to come in that situation and lead Pine Richland down the field just speaks volumes to, what their coaches have done with that team over the course of this year and how they've kept those guys prepared. Even though they were using the Wildcat, it was like, hey, if we ever need to throw the ball, here's what the plan's going to be.
I tell you what, Coach Ladon, I mean, incredible job the last 2 years. That's all you can say.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Pine Richland now back in the WPIAL championship game. So we see the bracket here. Peters is the only unbeaten team. Pine Richland has made their way from the number 3 seed into the WPIAL finals once again for the second straight year. And this game's actually a rematch of the 2020 WPIAL championship game when Pine Richland beat Peters Township. I think it was 35-0. That was the first year we did the show.
Yeah.
That was when Coach Casper was running the show at Pine Richland and took them all the way to the state championship. But this version of Pine Richland, once again, kind of like last year when they won the WPIAL title, they started off a little bit slow. They made a change on offense. They went to that Wildcat set with Ethan Pillar running the ball, and now they've just swept their way through all the way back to the championship game. They have all the history here. They're the defending WPIAL and state champions. They've got, Ethan Pillar at running back. They've got, Ryan Corey, the Wisconsin commit on the offensive line. Now Aaron Strader just had this big game as his freshman quarterback, so we'll see how much he plays, which that could potentially, like we talked about with the 6A matchup, you want to do some things differently. Well, potentially putting him in at quarterback, there's not going to be a lot of tape on that. So
Yeah.
that potentially changes some things. That said, Peters Township just played a team in Moon who was also doing the Wildcat quarterback thing with Josh Bladel and really shut them down. So Peters has had a little bit of prep for this Wildcat offense with their game against Moon last week that they had. And Moon just couldn't get anything going offensively. So Peters has seen it, but seeing it and stopping it when you have an offensive line the size that Pine Richland has and a running back the size of Ethan Pillar makes a little bit of a difference. So this is going to be a good game. Pine Richland has the pedigree, but Peters Township missed the playoffs last year just barely on those Gardner points for the tiebreakers, and now has really been on a mission this year. After barely missing the playoffs last year, has really just been throttling everybody they played. So they've got the best offense and defense in 5A, and they've beat multiple 6A opponents this season. So it's going to be a good one. And Peters is on a mission to try and claim that first WPIAL title in school history, which we've seen some teams do, right? Penn Trafford did it 2 years ago and went all the way on and won the state title. So it's not impossible. But it's going to be a fun collision of storylines too, where you've got the defending champs in one corner and then the guys on the other side trying to win their first title in school history.
Important Pine Richland, I think, get out in front early. With any team who runs that kind of offense, especially in a high pressure situation such as this, they really need to get out in front. But Peters, hey, look, even if they get behind, they can't panic. And those are the storylines that I just love, to follow here is, who's going to impose their own will on their opponent early on, and then how does their opponent, react to that? Do they stick with the plan or do they start to get nervous? Oh my God, who's going to be the more mature of the two teams to stick with the game plan, the longest. Always fascinating for me to watch all of that unfold in these big games, especially district championships like this. But Pine Richland, very important that they jump on in front early, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say the only caveat is last week against Penn Hills, they didn't jump out in front. They were down 9-0 and kicked that field goal early in the fourth quarter and then came back. But their defense kept it low scoring enough that they were still in the game and able to come back.
Sure.
If Peters gets up early, Pine Richland's defense really needs to lock it down and prevent Peters from running away with it. Because what Peters has done all year is, Peters has scored multiple defensive touchdowns this season. So they are capable of scoring whoever's on the field, whether it's offense, defense, special teams. They've had kick return touchdowns. Carter Shanafelt's been really good at that. Peters can throw the ball, we know, with Nolan DeLucia. They can also run the ball, Vinny Sarcone, and they have a couple other backs who will see some time. They've got a slew of receivers. So Pine Richland's secondary is going to be tested, maybe more so than they were tested against Penn Hills. Although Penn Hills with Julian Duggar, he was more of a dual threat guy. Nolan DeLucia is not going to run the ball a ton. So more of just a true, pocket passing quarterback.
Yeah.
But Peters has that passing game that they can come back quickly too. So both teams are capable of beating you in multiple
Well,
ways.
well, look, and that's part of why coaches have to make adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and having a full repertoire like Peters has is very beneficial that they can throw or run. Where Pine Richland is very much limited, to I mean, they've made it very clear that they're just going to run it and run it some more and run it some more. Um, you
Until they
know,
absolutely had to throw.
until they
Yeah.
right, and then it's almost too late. So I think remaining balanced, by Peters Township, that could be an enormous advantage in this game.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So let's look statewide. The WPIAL champion here on the bottom half of the left side will take on Cathedral Prep out of District 10 next round because Cathedral Prep got a bye because that's just how the state bracket is set up, which is stupid. But we'll talk about that later in
Just
our
tell
end
it
of the
like it
year
is,
show.
Ian.
It's dumb that teams get buys in the through
We
the first
talk
round of the
about
state
that
bracket.
all the time. I
We
can't
do.
believe it either.
Yeah.
My God, there's plenty of teams that want to keep playing. Why do they have open slots? I mean,
Yeah.
what's wrong? What's wrong with like a little human element and like getting some wild card teams? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, come on.
They could. I mean, there was an 8-2 Upper St. Clair team in the WPIAL that missed the playoffs because the WPIAL only had 8 slots to fill. So yes,
And
I agree.
the same thing with District 1, where you have 16, you have a full bracket of 16 teams in both 6A and 5A. You can't find like the highest, I mean, okay, so if you've got to come up with a formula or something like that, make it like, the highest seeded team who doesn't make it to who gets to the quarterfinal but doesn't make it to a semifinal or something. I don't know, but they got to come up with a way to get more teams in these upper class. There's no reason to have bye weeks. There's plenty of teams that want to keep playing, and the only reason why I believe that they don't put in the wild cards is they can't, I guess, figure out a mathematical formula to do it so they can absolve themselves of any criticism. That's just ridiculous.
Well, I have a formula, but
I know.
nevertheless, but that aside, I think one of the things I was talking with a friend of mine from Michigan over the weekend, and he was telling me about how Michigan runs their playoffs, and it seems like a lot of other states the districts kind of just exist for the regular season and then everyone goes into a statewide bracket right away. You don't have these district champions that enter, the district champion is whoever wins the regular season title in that district. And then everybody just gets split up throughout the playoffs, so you could have a district game in the first round, you could have a district game in the championship depending on how things work. But they manage it much more at a statewide level rather than letting the districts run their stuff and then kind of figuring it out after that's all done like Pennsylvania does.
I just don't buy the fact that if you've got 32 6A teams in District 1, that only one team makes it into the state tournament when the WPIAL has only what, 6 teams in
Five, yeah.
6A? Five
Yeah.
teams. They have
Mm-hmm.
5 teams in 6A and they get one team. And that just doesn't make any sense to me. The same thing with 5A. There's 32 5A teams in District 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a District 1 guy. I'm just saying there's 32 teams there. They only take one. And the WPIAL with, what do you have, like
Eight,
18,
18, yep.
18? So, still, I just can't see why districts that have more teams in a classification. And that's the flip side too. So there's more 1A teams for, obviously the WPIAL than maybe any class any district.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you should get more 1A teams into the state tournament, not just one, but what do I know?
Yeah. We'll talk about that more at our
I
year
know,
end
right?
show.
In
So
the
we'll
off
tease
season,
that a little
maybe.
bit. Yeah. But 5A statewide here. 8 out of my top 10 ranked teams are remaining in the round of 16, or I guess round of 15 here because Cathedral Prep got a bye. Upper St. Clair didn't make the playoffs at all. Penn Hills just lost to Pine Richland in what was a top 5 matchup in my rankings. Penn Hills slipped a little bit after the loss, but some good good matchups this week. I mean, we've got Peters Township is my number 1 ranked team against Pine Richland, my number 3 ranked team. And then in District 12, the showdown between Imhotep Charter and Roman Catholic for the District 12 championship is another top 4 matchup. So the top 4 in my rankings are all facing off this week in 5A, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that Imhotep Roman Catholic looms large. So yeah, I mean, is it a collision course with Peters Township to get, to get to the state championship there? Boy, it sure looks like it to me, but that's why we play the games.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think Springfield Delco is playing Strathaven too in another
Yeah,
top 10 matchup.
yeah. Chester, I tell you, watch out for them. I tell you, they've been good all year and getting better. And go MVB. I mean, we've been talking about them all year, gang. The fact that every single athlete out there now, you're competing. I mean, there's so much going on in the world of college recruiting in all sports. Just go MVB. Just look at their timeline on Twitter and what they're doing for their athletes. You're going to say, I got to get me one of these. And, that's all I can say. I mean, we haven't been saying anything other than go and see what they're doing for their athletes all year long, right, Ian? I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's football or basketball, and it's across everything. I mean, everywhere you go, it's Instagram, and I've even seen stuff on YouTube out there now, and obviously Twitter and on their website there. And it's not the fact of what they're doing, it's who they're doing it for, which are mostly college coaches, are the ones that are paying attention to what's going on Go MVB. So with the emphasis so much on college coaches' use of social media, you need to use the best possible way to get attention, and that's Go MVB.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on that coaches are out there looking on Twitter, Facebook, maybe not Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever else, YouTube for for players. And I actually had a college coach, a assistant position coach DM me on Twitter this week and say, "Hey, can you send me some WPIAL kids because I'm from the Pittsburgh area originally. I'd love to bring some 412 kids down here to where I'm coaching. So, that's why I always encourage people to
Yeah.
tag me in their highlights and I'll try and retweet them because you never know who's out there watching.
You never know. Right, exactly right. Just like the film never lies, you never know who's watching. And that's the other thing too, is the fact that Go MVB is all about promoting their athletes, and what they're going to do is keep you along the straight and narrow. They're going to make sure that your social media profile is on the up and up. It's going to be one that you don't mind putting in front of a college coach, and one that at least when a college coach, looks at you, it's not even necessarily what you put out there. It's like, who are in your circle? Like, who do you like tweets from? Who do you follow? That's how in depth, it gets out there on social media and their evaluation of you. Go MVB is going to be able to do that evaluation for you to make sure everything is all on the up and up.
Yep. So go check them out. We've got a link right here. You can copy it, type it in. Bruce can probably also post it in the chat. So if you're
Yeah.
watching later on YouTube, you can find the link and go check out what they have available.
Yeah. This is time.
All right. So we talked about the big championship games that are happening in 5A and 6A. So now we will go through the quarterfinal results and semifinal matchups in 4A, 3A, 2A, and 1A. In 4A, obviously these were the quarterfinals. Aliquippa got everything they could handle from Latrobe, but came out on top thanks to Tyke Hayes's big rushing performance of 256 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mars with a strong defensive performance to beat Central Valley 24-14. Balanced performance from the Mars offense. Evan Wright with 2 rushing touchdowns and Luke Goodworth with nearly 200 yards passing and a touchdown. McKeesport beat Trinity 28-14. There was, I'll say, a little bit of some post-game discourse on Twitter about this one. It wouldn't have impacted the result, but at the end of the first half, McKeesport was up 7-0. Trinity was attempting a long field goal. It was like 45 yards. It was a long field goal attempt. McKeesport sent Keemon Spell back to stand on the goal line in case the kick went short. And he caught it right on the goal line and ran it all the way back 100 yards for a touchdown. Now, according to the people who know the high school football rules much better than I do, apparently there's a rule in Pennsylvania high school or nationally, I'm not sure, but if the ball crosses the goal line after a kick, it's a touchback and a dead ball, and that's it. So there was some debate and some people on Twitter trying to break down film over whether or not the field goal attempt actually crossed the goal line, or if he caught it on the 1-yard line, if it should have been ruled down in the end zone because the ball went into the end zone, depending on where he caught it. But the call on the field was they let it go back for a touchdown. So it wouldn't have impacted the end result. McKeesport still won the game. But congratulations to Trinity on a pretty good season. You know, they won a playoff game for the first time since 2007. They had that win over TJ, which was the first time they beat TJ, I think, since like 1985 or 86. So, overall, a really good season for Trinity. And then the TJ Montour game that we've already talked about. You know, what a performance by Montour in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe it's their year. There's always teams that uh not, and it's not that they didn't appear out of nowhere. It's because people just weren't paying attention to Montour.
And I think with Montour, like they lost an early season game to Aliquippa. And so, they were always just kind of hanging in there, like second, third place in the standings. And then it wasn't until late in the season that they beat Central Valley. They beat West Allegheny the last week of the year. So they had lost to Aliquippa, but hadn't played those other top teams from their conference yet. So I think the jury was still kind of out on Montour's, like, how good is this team actually? Until late in the year when they beat those two teams, I was like, oh, they're actually pretty darn good. And now with this win over TJ, it's like, oh, they're really darn good.
Yeah.
So looking at the bracket here, we've got Aliquippa taking on Mars in the top half of the bracket in that one semifinal, and then McKeesport taking on Montour in the bottom half of the bracket in the other semifinal. This is the top 4 seeds, so good job to the WPIAL on seeding these teams correctly because the top 4 all made the semifinals.
Yeah, no, good stuff. And I tell you what, really tough matchups there, but obviously you got to favor, McKeesport and Aliquippa.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
We'll go a little quicker on these because these are semifinals than we do with the championship games. But Aliquippa, loaded with history, has won the most WPIAL championships of any schools, has won 100 playoff games now. That was the other thing. Aliquippa's win over Latrobe was their 100th playoff victory in school history. So congratulations to the Quips on that one. That's just incredible. 100 wins in the playoffs. Like, wow. Aliquippa, 15 straight WPIAL championship games. They've won 2 WPIAL titles in a row. Montour, or not Montour, sorry. Mars, my bad. Mars has never won a WPIAL championship. So, the history is certainly on the side of Aliquippa here. But that being said, Mars has a pretty darn good coach in Coach Casper, who in just his second year has taken them to the semifinals for the first time since 2015.
Yeah.
So Mars is definitely trending in the right direction. I don't know how they'll match up on the outside with Aliquippa. Aliquippa has a lot of really talented receivers. I don't know how Mars's secondary will match up with that, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
It's really difficult too because these teams that have faced off against Aliquippa have had some pretty experienced, big time coaches. Obviously, Mark Lyons and going back to even when Bell Vernon was, in the 4A classification or whatever like that. But Coach K, I tell you what, he's just got a knack about him on winning those big games. I mean, obviously, I mean he's a two-time state championship winning coach. The type of high pressure games that he's had accustomed to. I mean, that level of experience, boy, I tell you what, that's going to go a long way. I give the planets a fighting chance.
That was an excellent pun. That was very well done. I think the one thing that I think gives Aliquippa a bit of an edge here, and I agree with everything you said about Coach Casper, and Coach Warfield's done a great job at Aliquippa as well. I think Aliquippa is a very senior heavy team this year, especially at the skill positions. Tyke Hayes is a junior, but being a Penn State commit, I mean, he's obviously one of the most talented juniors in the state. But Quentin Good, Aliquippa's quarterback's a senior. They've got some seniors at the other skill positions. And Cam Lindsey, their linebacker, is a senior. He's going to Pitt. Brandon Banks, a defensive back, who's going to Yale. So Aliquippa's very upperclassman heavy, whereas Mars has some really talented sophomores and juniors that have seen a lot of playing time. But
Yeah.
I think Aliquippa has been on this stage before, so they're not going to be shell shocked by what happens.
Yeah, and again, I'm really anxious to see, um, how special teams pans out. Sometimes that's the Achilles heel of the quips, and so we'll see.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the real question here becomes if Mars can stay balanced and move the ball through the air against Aliquippa's incredibly talented secondary, they could give them a game. But if the Quip secondary gets a couple interceptions, especially early, this game could turn pretty quickly.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
All right, the other semifinal, McKeesport against Montour. Montour's got that dual threat quarterback in Jake Wolf, who's been our WPIAL Blitz Go MVP Player of the Week a few, or at least once this year. I think just once.
Yeah,
But he's put up a ton of touchdowns, both with his arm and his legs. Obviously, threw 5 touchdowns this past week. Montour's offense is rolling right now. McKeesport has statistically the best defense in 4A. McKeesport also runs that triple option wishbone attack. They've got a bunch of talented backs. Anthony Boyd, their star running back, along with Keemon Spell, the speedy freshman. Keith Spell's kind of a power back senior. And Garrett Tarker, their quarterback's actually thrown for some touchdowns this year, which is a little different for a McKeesport team to actually have a bit of a passing game. So it's going to be a good one. I think McKeesport, other than Aliquippa, has probably been the best defense Montour's faced all year. But I don't know if McKeesport has seen a passing game like what Montour is going to bring to the table either. So this should be a good one. McKeesport's challenge traditionally in the playoffs has always been if they get down by a couple scores and it takes their running game out of it and they have to throw, are they able to come back? Because it's just something they don't do a whole lot. And that's always been the challenge for McKeesport. Whereas Montour certainly has the passing game to score with McKeesport if this turns into a shootout.
yeah. That I think the most intriguing matchup, maybe of semifinals, at least in the major classifications, is this Montour and McKeesport.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And I think our friends at KDKA Radio, Dan Zangrelli, who was on the show last year, I think they're broadcasting this one this week, so
Good,
should be a good one.
good.
All right, statewide, looking at the bracket, we had a bit of an upset with Bethlehem Catholic beating Allentown Central Catholic in the District 11 championship game, at least as far as my rankings were concerned. And then
I think it was clearly an upset. I mean, it wasn't just your rankings, but that was the um uh, uh prevailing opinion.
mm-hmm. And that one is important to the WPIAL because the WPIAL enters the state bracket in the semifinal round here, which will be in the top left quadrant of the bracket, but they potentially would play someone coming out of either District 4, District 11. So that Allentown Central Catholic played Aliquippa in the state semis last year, so them losing is noteworthy. Out of District 4, we had a top 10 matchup between Jersey Shore and Selinsgrove, and Selinsgrove came out on
Yeah.
top of that one. So noteworthy result there as well. And as far as my rankings go, these these three WPIAL teams sitting at 4, 5, and 6 in the rankings, right there, kind of bunched together. We'll see who's able to come out and get into that state semifinal out of that group.
Yeah, and a team that is kind of down your list there, but at the top of mine is Pope John Paul II. I think out of District 1. There's not a lot of 4A teams there. They're playing a lot of 5A and 6A opponents. I mean, and beating them. So,
Yeah, and I think they're playing what, Bonner Prendy this week
yeah,
out of
that's,
District 12.
yeah, we'll find out.
Yep. And then obviously Bishop McDevitt being the, powerhouse that they are, the defending state champions, have been kind of just rolling through District 3 so far.
Yeah, they're playing number 16, Lampeter Strasburg this week. So, yeah, they might get a little test there.
Okay. On to 3A, where we teased a little bit of these results earlier in the show. Bell Vernon rolling past Deer Lakes. Bell Vernon has shown a bit more of a passing game than I think I've ever seen out of them this season. Quentin Martin kind of did it all. They saved him for much of the regular season. Kind of tried to limit his touches so he was fresh in the playoffs. And my goodness, did he look fresh with over 200 yards of total offense and 3 total touchdowns. East Allegheny pulling it out against South Park in a rematch of a week 0 game. East Allegheny now making the semifinals for the first time since 1992. Avonworth all over Beaver, and this result was even closer than the game actually was. Beaver scored a few late touchdowns in garbage time to make it a little closer, but Avonworth looks the part of the powerhouse. And then Elizabeth Forward with those 3 defensive touchdowns, and they returned a kickoff for a touchdown in their victory over West Mifflin. So looking at the bracket, we've got Bell Vernon taking on East Allegheny, and then Avonworth taking on Elizabeth Forward. So let's talk about those. East Allegheny hasn't even been this far in the tournament since 1992 when they won the
Wow.
WPIAL championship and made it all the way to the state finals, whereas Bell Vernon is the defending WPIAL and state champions.
Over
So
30 years, man.
yep. So I like Bell Vernon's chances in this one. It's been a storybook season for East Allegheny. The one thing I will say though, East Allegheny has won a ton of close games this year, so they definitely are a bit more battle tested in those close matchups. Whereas Bell Vernon is battle tested against tougher opponents. Their non-conference slate was incredibly difficult. They beat McKeesport. They were the only team to beat McKeesport this year. They lost to Thomas Jefferson. They beat Penn Trafford, who made the playoffs in 5A. So Bell Vernon has played a lot of tough opponents from higher classifications too, and has just stormed through every 3A opponent they've played so far.
Yeah, and I think that the experience of getting to the championship game last year is really paying dividends. I think of the confidence level of this Bell Vernon team this year. Um, they've been stymied. I mean, in beyond the WPIAL level for some time to have that success. I tell you what, I think that was very important for this year's team as well.
Absolutely, and I think it's changed a little bit about how Coach Humbert approached the season, like we talked about with Quentin Martin, kind of limiting his carries earlier in the year because he knows now, the toll that the run to the championship game will take on his players. So he's trying to keep his guys all fresh for later in the year. I do have to mention too, this is a rematch of a quarterfinal game from last year where Bell Vernon was all over East Allegheny in that quarterfinal last year. So the revenge factor is there for East A, but I think Bell Vernon will make it back to the championship game once again.
Yeah, so do I.
All right, the other one though, oh boy, this one's going to be a good one. Avonworth is the only undefeated team in 3A, but they look really, really strong. They'll get a challenge for all their worth with Elizabeth Forward this week. EF is playing some of their best ball. Their only loss was against Bell Vernon, so this is just going to be a great semifinal between these two teams. And teams that have been recently to this level, but teams that haven't had a ton of historical success, right? Avonworth won the WPIAL championship in 2019 for the first time in 60 years. They hadn't even been to a championship game.
Yeah.
They made one, I think, in 2014. But other than that, hadn't been there for a long time. But now, 4 semifinals in 5 years for Avonworth, third semi in 4 years for Elizabeth Forward. Somewhat surprisingly, the first playoff meeting between the two, but teams that are building their legacies and building the stories of their football programs as we've watched them over the last few years.
Yeah, just a very intriguing matchup, and that's what the postseason is all about.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so looking statewide, my rankings really love the WPIAL teams here. Have those three ranked as the top three in the state. Newman Goretti, the defending runners-up out of District 12, got a free pass to this round because Kip DuBois forfeited to them. And then Wyomissing out of District 3, who's got another strong team this year.
Yeah, I mean, Wyomissing plays West Perry, number 11, for the District 3 3A championship Saturday. And but don't forget about, you've got Danville in there. That's a team that's just played just a killer schedule. And but yeah, really interested to see how it all shakes out. Don't forget about Central there at District 6. I mean, they're just lurking, I think.
Yeah, and Central has always been a tough out in the state semifinals. I know WPIAL champs have gotten past them the last few years, but it has not been easy for them. Central's a tough, really strong opponent. You're right. That the WPIAL champ could potentially play in the state semis
Yep.
once they get through the WPIAL bracket. This one, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. Between Wyomissing's ground game, if Newman Goretti can pull it off again. They kind of had a somewhat surprising run last year, but we're a really talented team with a lot of good skill position players. So this is going to be a good one in 3A to kind of see who makes it eventually through the bracket. And the one other thing I should mention, I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the show. My rankings this week were 77 and 13 at predicting winners correctly. So that was like 85, 86%.
Wow.
So they've been pretty accurate.
Wow.
I know I'm kind of pumping myself up like, oh, I made this
No, but
ranking formula,
well,
but
that's where
it's been pretty good at actually predicting results too.
well, that's why DraftKings is starting to monitor like what you're doing there. So
All right. On to 2A. A lot of low scoring, close games here. There were some thrilling results here. Steel Valley needed a interception on the goal line at the end of the game to preserve their victory over Western Beaver. Javen Peel, Western Beaver's freshman quarterback, had a heck of a game with 255 yards and 3 touchdowns in a losing effort. Steel Valley's Donald Barksdale ran for 250 and 2 touchdowns in their winning effort. And Steel Valley actually threw a passing touchdown in this game too, which is a little bit of a rarity for them. They're usually a pretty run-heavy team. I think by the seeds, this wasn't an upset, but Mohawk beating Amani Christian, I think, was an upset just
it
because of
was.
how heralded Amani's team was and how much, they've got the D1 recruits and all that. But Mohawk was gritty and pulled it out, and they played really good defense in this one to slow down Amani's team. Beaver Falls, a thrilling victory in this one. Neshannock was up 13 to 6 actually. And Michael Blackshear returned a blocked punt for a touchdown in the fourth quarter that set up the winning 2-point conversion by Detallion Buford for Beaver Falls to win. So how about that? Beaver Falls wins the game on a blocked punt return for a touchdown and then a 2-point conversion to win it.
That's crazy.
And then
That
Washington and McGuffey. Washington had beat McGuffey 13-7 2 weeks ago, and they beat him 18-7 this week.
nice.
Yes. All right. So looking at the bracket here in the semifinals, we've got Steel Valley taking on Mohawk in the top half and Beaver Falls taking on Washington in the bottom half. Beaver Falls coming out of the number 10 seed on a bit of a run here, but let's not forget, even though Beaver Falls entered the playoffs at just 5-5, 4 out of those 5 losses were by single digits. So they were in pretty much all of their games, even the ones they lost. And now they've just been able to find a winning formula, blocking a punt and returning it for a touchdown to beat Neshannock in the quarterfinals here. And Beaver Falls, I think a few weeks ago on the show, I said, their record doesn't show it, but don't count them out for making a run to the title game because they've been to every WPIAL championship since they moved down to 2A 3 years ago. So this is their fourth straight semifinal appearance, potentially making it, to the title game. So the first one, this is another one of, history versus a team in a historic position. Steel Valley, this is their third straight semifinal. They're the defending WPIAL champs. They've arguably been the best WPIAL 2A team since we moved to the 6 classifications. They've won 3 championships, been to a 4th championship game, or 5th. Either way, at any rate, Steel Valley they won a state title. They've won multiple WPIAL titles in the 8 years of the 6 classification era. So they've got a run heavy team. Mohawk's got a bit more of a balanced offense with Jay Rohn at quarterback and Justin Boston, the running back. But Mohawk's never been here before. This is their first semifinal appearance, and I spelled appearance wrong. I'm sorry for the typo. One typo on 37 slides isn't bad, I guess.
Not bad.
But,
well, we've only got 28 in, so
yeah,
you don't know.
That's true. That's true. But Mohawk, Mohawk here for the first time. So this is, historic territory for them. How do they fare against the Steel Valley team that's the defending WPIAL champs?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, definitely, having been there, it is really difficult to say how much that really aids a team, but the psyche of it is just enormous. And when we say, learning how to win, well, Mohawk still hasn't won. So they're still in the learning process where Steel Valley, I mean, that's just part of their persona. So I think that that's going to make it really difficult for Mohawk here.
I agree. And the other thing I'll say is Steel Valley now, for the last few weeks in a row here, has beaten Sarah Catholic in the last week of the regular season, who liked to throw the ball. They beat Western Beaver, who also had the freshman quarterback who broke the WPIAL freshman passing record, liked to throw the ball. So they've seen now 2 straight offenses that had passing games. And at the 2A level, a lot of the time, you just see teams that like to run the ball. So the teams that have good defense, are really built to stop the run. But Steel Valley now has played 2 games in a row against teams that can throw the ball. So I think that helps them, at least schematically, go out and prepare for Mohawk's passing game. That this will be their 3rd straight opponent that likes to throw the ball. All right, on the other semifinal, Beaver Falls taking on Washington. Surprisingly, for as historic as these programs have been, and for ages they were both in AA back in the 4 classification era, this is only the 3rd playoff meeting between the 2 of them, which is somewhat surprising to me. When I went through, I was like, they've only met twice before, but they've split their prior meetings. Beaver Falls winning in 1984. They went on to win the WPIAL title that year, and Washington won in 2001. They went on to win the WPIAL title that year. But both of these schools have won multiple WPIAL championships. They've won state championships. They've been here before. 5 semis in 8 years for Washington, from 2012 to 2019, getting back now a few years later. Beaver Falls, their 5th semi in the last 6 years. So a lot of history with these schools, a lot of tradition. Washington has the better record, looks statistically better, but Washington had a couple teams at the bottom end of their conference that were pretty bad, whereas Beaver Falls played in a much tougher conference, so they're a little more battle tested, even though their record, like I talked about earlier, they lost some of those games. But this should be a really good one. I really don't know which way this is going to go. Beaver Falls is perfectly capable of winning this game, though. Don't let their 10 seed surprise you.
No, and look, I've been high on Washington really all year. I had them ranked when a lot of people, didn't. So,
Yep.
which is a lot of fun there. And Beaver Falls, I'll tell you, I think that they kind of maybe had a lucky break to get as far as they've gotten. And I like Washington this game. I think that they're going to be, I think that they're the much better team, and I expect them to win.
All right. On to the state bracket, where my power rankings formula doesn't like the WPIAL teams as much. Whereas in 3A, it was the top 3 teams. Here we don't have a WPIAL team ranked in the top six. Had a big matchup last week with Southern Columbia taking on Mount Carmel. For the second year in a row, Southern Columbia lost to Mount Carmel in the regular season and then got revenge on them in the postseason. So they are the powerhouse, obviously, but they have a game against Troy this week, who's another team that my power ranking formula likes. Westinghouse out of the Pittsburgh City League got a big win. They'll take on a Central Clarion team who I believe I saw Central Clarion has scored like 650 points and only given up 99 this year. Now, granted, playing in District 9, a little bit different up there, but nevertheless still very impressive. But I like Westinghouse's chances here. And that this left side of the bracket, I mean, you're going to have the WPIAL champion entering at the semifinal level, and then the WPIAL champion will take on whoever wins between probably Westinghouse and the District 10 champion, which will either be Farrell or Mercyhurst Prep, which should be a great showdown. I
Great.
mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're gonna have quarter or state quarterfinal games here in the WPIAL championship, and then that potentially Farrell Westinghouse game. That those teams are all good enough to play in a state championship game, and they're going to be quarterfinal games, which is just crazy. But it's a murderer's row on the left side of the bracket here to get through it and to just get to the state championship game. I should also mention, I'll let you talk about the right side of the bracket, but since we mentioned Farrell, I should mention that tonight, breaking news, their school board voted by a 7-1 margin to petition the state to join District 7. So we're going to keep an eye on that because potentially Farrell could be coming back to the WPIAL this year or next year, next cycle. Farrell played in the WPIAL for a long time. They're located in southern Mercer County, so not that far away from the likes of Mohawk and Neshannock and those type of schools. So geographically, not a bad fit, but potentially adding another powerhouse program to the WPIAL if the state and the WPIAL accept their transition from District 10 back to the WPIAL. And a few years ago, we had their coach, Coach Pigas, on the show, and I asked him about that of potentially rejoining the WPIAL, and he was like, "Oh, we always keep our options open. Got to consider things." And he was a great guest, so we certainly appreciate the time that he gave us a few years ago. And personally, I would love to see Farrell come back. I know that some of the District 10 people really like having Farrell there. I'd like to see him come back, but we'll see how it all plays out.
I would expect that there's, if Farrell could be the first, you know, uh, first domino to fall over here. I would expect that, from this there might be some other teams out of District 9 and 10 that would, try and get back in the WPIAL. But that's just me, and it's only the reason why is the way that the WPIAL runs, basically setting the schedules and what have you. It sometimes it's a lot easier on the schools themselves. Farrell has an enormous difficulty in actually scheduling teams. So by joining the WPIAL, it isn't necessarily from a competitive perspective. It's like that the athletic director and the whole schools can relax as far as like what teams that they schedule because their schedule is pretty much set. So I think that could be the overriding factor as to why they want to come back is the fact that their scheduling becomes much easier because nobody wants to play them when they don't have to.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I think some of the other things in play is the WPIAL used to have a very broad reach. Erie McDowell used to be a WPIAL school. Actually, when James Conner went there, he
Mhm.
played in the WPIAL. Altoona used to be a WPIAL school. Hollidaysburg was a WPIAL school. If you go back far enough in time, Johnstown was a WPIAL school. So there have been West Shamokin in District 6 also had played in the WPIAL somewhat recently into the 2010s. I think when we moved to six classifications in 2016, that made a bit of a difference because a lot of schools on those fringes left for travel reasons because they didn't want to be traveling to play their WPIAL conference opponents. They moved back to those, central PA conferences, things like that. But we'll see what happens here if anything else changes.
Yeah.
So Yeah, we'll see. So, any other matchups on the right side of the bracket here? Or Southern Columbia Troy's kind of the big one this week, but any other ones you have your eye on?
I broadcast the Camp Hill Trinity game last week. Pretty incredible. Camp Hill wins the District 3 2A championship. They've got a dynamite quarterback, and just Tim Bigelow was our guest on Fresh Set of Downs this week, and just has a very fresh approach. And the team is actually um, giving him some time off because there are other teams that are playing for state championships in the same week, and they're all within like about 10 miles of the school. So he's actually giving the team off like Tuesday night from practice so they can go watch the soccer team play in a state semifinal. And if they make it to the championship game, they're actually going to go to the championship game on Friday afternoon, a soccer game, and then play a PIAA game Friday night. I mean, so
That's
and it,
really cool to support the school, and especially at the 2A level, you probably don't get that many other students besides like the soccer team, football team. Uh, Yeah, that's really cool that they're doing that. Um, and I guess sort of geographically with the location being
Yeah,
so
correct. It's
close,
all
that's yeah,
within. It's not like they're driving hours or whatever like
yeah,
that. I mean, even Cumberland Valley. I mean, it's a very close group there around Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, and Mechanicsburg and all like that is very close. I mean, top is like 20 minutes one direction. I mean, so why not? And I think it's just enormously beneficial because the team gets their mind off the game a little bit that way, that they get refreshed and that. So I think it's a great move, and hats off to Camp Hill for winning the District 3 2A championship last week.
yeah. The other one I want to talk about here is West Catholic out of Philadelphia. The team Camp Hill is playing. They were they were 0-9, and because they're the only 2A team in District 12, got to qualify for the state bracket. Actually, got a bye up until last week where they played Bristol out of District 1 and they beat them. So now they're in the round of 16
Yeah.
statewide with a 1-9 record. Like, I mean, you
Well,
want to
they're
talk
not
about
that bad. I mean, they're playing a tough District 12 schedule. They're playing teams obviously much larger than them. And I did see them play earlier this season. They're not as bad as the record indicates. It's the level of competition. And all I can say is talking with Coach Bigelow is from Camp Hill is they're in the same boat. They have to play because of where they're located. They have to play schools much bigger than what they would. They're not playing. I think there's only one other 2A team on their schedule all season, and that's Trinity, who they just beat for the 2A championship. So everybody that they're playing is larger. He likes that. He thinks that that's beneficial because when they play teams of like size, they're going like, I got to get me one of these. I mean, they like playing the smaller schools then.
yeah, that's a fair point. That and I think locally, like with Bell Vernon, most of their non-conference schedule was teams in higher classifications, and then when they start playing the 3A teams, you see the difference that it makes. So
Yep.
yeah. All right,
Onward.
on to 1A, where we did have some blowouts here. Southside Beaver all over Greensburg Central Catholic. Clairton edging out Union in a tight game, and then Fort Cherry beating Rochester for the first time in their history. Fort Cherry had been 0-4 against Rochester in the playoffs before this one, so a big win for Fort Cherry's history, and congrats to Coach Gary on that one. I know that means a lot to him, just for everything he's been through. His dad coached there, his grandfather
Yeah.
coached there. The stadium's named after his grandfather. So really cool to see Fort Cherry having some success. And then Bishop Canevin beating California as well. This sets up two really good semifinal matchups with the top four seeds all squaring off. Southside Beaver taking on Clairton and Fort Cherry taking on Bishop Canevin. So this is going to be really good. Southside has been outstanding all year. Clairton, that 9-2 record's a little bit deceiving because they started the season 0-2. They didn't score a point the first 2 weeks, but they played Westinghouse and Washington, who two teams we talked about in the 2A bracket are both,
Yeah.
top 10 ranked 2A teams. And then once Clareton started playing 1A opponents, they started crushing them, and they've won 9 straight games against 1A opponents. So Clareton is better than that 9-2 record indicates because those two losses were against higher classification teams. They just beat a really good Union squad who is the defending WPIAL champs. So this should be a good one against Southside. And then Fort Cherry and Bishop Canevin have already played once this year, and it was an outstanding game. So to talk a little bit more here, Clareton has the history, but Southside looks really darn good this year. They run a triple option offense. Brody Omashi, the quarterback, Ryan Navarro, the running back, AC Corfield, and Southside can just ground and pound you to death. They've got a sizable offensive and defensive front and have really shut teams down. But Clareton's got a lot of young, dynamic talent at the skill positions. They can both run and throw. Michael Wright, the quarterback, has been really good. Drasheer Jones and Dante Wright at running back have been really good. Zamir Correll at wide receiver for Clareton. I sorry, I have to pat myself on the back for a minute here. All these names that I've rattled off tonight, other than like when they were on the slides for the statistics, I've just like had off the top of my head.
Yeah, right.
And I don't have rosters in front of me right now. So I've just been writing about this stuff all year that I just remember it. And it just hit me right now. I'm like, as I'm trying to remember these Clareton players, and I'm like, man, I have all these kids' names in my head. How do I? Yeah. So at
Yeah.
any rate, I
But
digress.
Clareton was the team that, as we wound down the season here, that I felt was, going to be like the mover and the shaker, kind of like what Pine Richland was last year and, like 5A. I felt Clareton was, they had a rough go of it to start, but it was really coming on strong. And obviously that shows by making the semifinal.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're like we said, they're young players at those skill positions are just loaded with talent and athleticism. Clareton's going to have to throw the ball to win this game, but Clareton has guys who can break off those long touchdowns, whereas Southside with their that triple option attack, they're slow, they're methodical, and they'll ground and pound
And
you to
they've got to
death.
get the lead first.
Yeah. Yeah, but Clareton has a team that can pull it off as well. Pull off, hit the big plays, and potentially pull off comebacks as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think turnovers are going to be the big one in this game. Whoever wins the turnover battle probably wins this game. All right, and in the other semifinal, these two teams have already met once this year, with Fort Cherry winning a shootout 48-41. And the incredible thing is, like, if you look statistically at their defenses, both these teams are giving up like 10
No.
points per game. And when they played, it was an absolute shootout. They just couldn't stop each other. So I think that tells you how good these two offenses are between Canevin and Fort Cherry. I think the difference here, even though Fort Cherry won the first game, I think Canevin, having been to the last two WPIAL championship games, winning it in 2021, being upset last year, being the runners up, I think they're kind of on a mission. And especially even in 2021, they won the WPIAL title and then they lost to Red Bank Valley in the state semifinals. So I think this Canevin team with this senior class that they have has been close for so many years and now, really has their eyes on potentially trying to make a run to the state championship game. Whereas Fort Cherry hasn't been to the semifinals since 2001.
Yeah.
They've got a sophomore quarterback in Matt Seg, who is arguably one of the most talented sophomores in the state, but they haven't been here before. So I think Canevin's experience really is going to be the difference factor in this one.
Yeah. Is the stage going to be, are the lights going to be too bright for Fort Cherry? And but I think that, Matt Sag, though, I mean, he's a transcendent player. And I like Fort Cherry in this one, quite honestly, even though that they might not necessarily have, the pedigree. I like Fort Cherry in this matchup.
Both these teams can score. Both of them can both throw and run the ball. So I think, however it comes down, this one has the feelings of being another shootout. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think this is going to be a, 21-17 game. This one has the makings of another one that's played in the 30s or 40s.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So looking at the statewide bracket here, the big news this past week was South Williamsport upsetting Canton in District 4.
Yeah.
The formula does like the District 7 teams, the WPIAL teams, having all four of them ranked in the top 9, and the WPIAL champ will enter here at the bottom left at the state semifinal level. They'll play either the District 9 or District 10 champions. So we'll see how those games progress. Red Bank Valley, as I mentioned, had made the state finals out of District 9 a couple years ago. But I think, Steel High is obviously the dominant force here with the quarterback they have, and Irby, and Irby's dad's the coach. He's a really good coach too. So I think this sets up really well for Steel High to make another run. I'm very intrigued by this South Williamsport Muncie game in District 4 this week. I think that's going to be another good one, but I like the WPIAL champions' chances to make it to the state championship game and have a showdown with Steel High once again.
I think the only team that has a chance of beating Steel High is a team like Clairton, and that's, I really do. Somebody who can match athleticism with athleticism, and but that's just me. I know that there's what, like, 5 or 6 teams that you've got ranked in between Steel High and Clairton, but and I still think that it's all about matchups in the postseason, and I think Clairton matches up very well to Steel High, and but we'll see. I mean, that's why we play the games.
Yep. Yeah, and I still say don't sleep on Bishop Canavan. I could easily see Bishop Canavan winning this thing, being the WPIAL representative
Sure.
in the state playoffs, just because of what's happened to them the last few years. That 2 years ago they really thought they were a team capable of going to the state championship game and challenging for the title, and then didn't make it, and then last year got upset in the WPIAL title game by Union, who wound up going all the way to the state finals. So I think I think Canavan's a team on a mission this year, and I really would not at all be surprised if we're talking about them in a few weeks as playing Steel High in the state championship game.
Yeah, I
But
can't
but Clareton's
disagree.
Clareton's got the tradition too. I mean, I said at the beginning of the year, when I think my pick at the beginning of the year was Clareton over Canavan for the WPIAL championship. So I've said I've followed the WPIAL long enough that my two rules are never bet against Aliquippa, never bet against Clareton. So it
Good stuff. Yeah,
yep.
that's not difficult.
All right. So if you have enjoyed listening to us talk for a good hour and a half here tonight about WPIAL and high school football, you can also check out our other shows. I'm on the Steel City Blitz Steelers podcast, which airs on Thursday nights. You can check us out either live on YouTube or later on any podcasting platform. And then Bruce has his Fresh Set of Down show, which he actually just finished recording earlier tonight. Bruce has been out on the deck for a long time, so I'm sure he's freezing since I've been talking for so long.
Actually, it's only my toes that are a little bit cold. But first set of downs, we had a great show. We had a great interview with Tim Bigelow, head coach of Camp Hill, and their big District 2 or District 3 2A championship over Trinity last week. Um, and then just went, rundown of all of the scores there. Myself, Dave Micah from EasternPAFootball.com, Bob Long. Um, I tell you what, there's no guys that know, you know, football better than Dave Micah and Bob Long in their respective areas, other than you, Ian, with the WPIAL. No, and I mean that seriously. I mean it we have a very good time together. We don't act like we know everything about every team, but we do have the entire eastern part of the state covered. That's for sure. And then obviously we've got the meltdown up at the state college covered as well. Bob and I talk about that, and yeah, it was a very good show. And gradually, we're gonna meld into as one. I mean, when Fresh Set of Downs and the WPIAL Blitz show kind of meld in for our, you know 2 week stint there for semifinals, and then for the championships there. And that's what really gets fun, I think, is and I think you're finding that out too, Ian, now is how, segueing everything into how it all comes together is a lot of fun. So, first set of downs. Yep, they had a great show. We're on demand there on Sports Stream Premium, or just check out. I think you can pretty much Google Fresh Set of Downs and it'll come up. So,
Yep. And same with the WPIAL Blitz show. You can
yeah.
Google that or just search for it on YouTube and you can find it quite easily. You can find us on Twitter mostly, but Facebook and rarely Instagram. But also check out my articles on steelcityblitz.com. I'll have in-depth previews of the WPIAL Championship games happening this week, as well as the semifinal matchups that will take place in 4A, 3A, 2A, and 1A. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate all the support we get, the people who comment in the chat, the people who watch later, the people who say nice things on Twitter, that retweet and everything and share, talk about the show. And it's just a lot of fun, right? Like I just love talking high school football, and it's a lot of fun to get to do it for an hour and a half every week. And we appreciate everyone who tunes in and watches.
Yeah, and we sure do. We sure do. And my game on Friday is going to be Manheim Township and Cumberland Valley. So big 6A matchup in District 3. That's what I'll be broadcasting. I'll actually be doing some other broadcasting for the NFHS network this week. Actually, I'll be doing a couple field hockey games on
Ooh,
Tuesday. Yeah, I mean, I did volleyball last week, so I kind of spread my wings there a little bit, when it comes to championship time. But listen, thanks so much, fans. We really appreciate it. Ian, always a pleasure. We'll see who we can round up for, a guest next week. I want to thank Ashley Loidus for her support as well. I met her from WTAE.
Channel 4.
She
Yep.
Channel 4. She was up at State College, and she had a lot of good things to say as well about just sports in general. So it was great meeting her this last week too. So we had a fun week, and we've got a few more here before we kind of wrap it up the early there in December. So for my buddy Ian McMeans, I'm Bruce Badgley. Listen, thank you very much for joining us on the WPIAL Blitz Show, and we'll see you next Monday at 9:15 after the kids go to bed.